The rain outside Metropolitan General Trauma Center, MGTC, was a sheet of violent, tropical noise, drowning out the muted screams from the ER inside. The silence in the small office was far louder. Evie Reed, a nurse with a deceptively slight build and perpetually quiet demeanor, stood across from Dr. Vance, the attending physician who was still sweating despite the air conditioning. His tie was loose, and his face was a mottled mask of relief and blinding humiliation. Only 3 minutes prior, Evie had saved his patient's life. Patient Dr. Vance had nearly killed. The emergency was a near fatal airway obstruction. Dr. Vance had panicked, fumbling the intubation tube. In a flash of pure muscle memory instinct, Evie had bypassed his stuttering command and performed a needle crick with a precision that bordered on surgical art, using only a standard field kit and a modified scalpel she stored in her personal trauma pack. The move was advanced, definitive, and far outside a standard UNASA scope, but it worked. That was a liability, Nurse Reed. Dr. Vance choked out, his voice thin with forced authority. You usurped my command. I didn't authorize a surgical airway. You showed blatant disregard for hierarchy. Evie looked at him, her gray eyes reflecting none of the storm outside, only a profound, silent exhaustion. The patient was coding. Doctor, the tube was bent. I secured the airway. You secured my firing, he hissed, pushing a termination folder across the desk. Effective immediately. Your clinical brilliance is outweighed by your insubordination. You're dismissed, Reed. Get out. She picked up the folder, nodding once. No plea, no argument. Her exit was as unremarkable as her tenure. Quiet, fiercely capable, and ultimately, profoundly misunderstood. She walked out of the climate-controlled quiet and into the horizontal, cold rain, clutching a cheap, over-the-shoulder canvas bag containing her few personal effects and the weighty injustice of her dismissal. The storm seemed to swallow her whole. To the staff at Metropolitan General, Evie Reed was the epitome of the small-town nurse, a stereotype they affixed to her because of her soft accent and her lack of flashy ambition. They assumed she had scraped by in nursing school, a background player content with administering Tylenol and charting vitals. They were wrong. Evie's competence wasn't loud. It was almost supernatural. While Dr. Vance lectured on hypotensive trauma, Evie could stand at the foot of a stretcher and by reading the near micro-muscle cues in a patient's face. The slight tremor in the mandibular joint. The subtle discoloration beneath the nail beds predict the exact trajectory of their internal injuries. She wasn't looking at the monitors. She was reading the patient's soul. Her reputation for managing the most dangerous high-acuity trauma cases wasn't built on shouting orders, but on being an uncanny clinical oracle. On multiple occasions, she had alerted the team to a massive internal hemorrhage before the CT scan even rolled back, noticing a faint, metallic, almost acidic scent. On the patient's breath, the scent of cellular breakdown and deep, uncompensated bleeding. She'd saved lives in Trauma Bay one more times than the entire current roster of residents combined. Yet her quick interventions were always folded seamlessly into the attendings. Official narrative. She was the unit's ghostwriter, correcting protocols, silently recalibrating pumps, and restocking specialized trauma carts without seeking or receiving credit. Her expertise, honed in theaters far more brutal than any city AR, far exceeded her job title. But the mastery remained unrecognized. They saw a woman performing tasks. They did not see a professional operating at the very peak of human medical instinct. Her genius was hidden in plain sight, mistaken for basic diligence. The lack of recognition was compounded by an undercurrent of professional hostility that Evie absorbed with a monastic silence. Her quiet competence seemed to irritate the insecure, acting as a mirror to their own inadequacy. The residents, fresh out of medical school, and intoxicated by their own potential, were the worst offenders. They mocked her with nicknames, like the Whisperer and Nurse. Know-it-all, Dr. Singh, a second-year resident notorious for his shaky hands, routinely ignored her subtle guidance. 1 week earlier, Evie had gently suggested a different angle for a difficult central line placement, noting a minor anatomical variation in the patient's neck. Dr. Singh, flushed with indignation, snapped. Stick to bandaging. Reed? I've done 1,000 of these. He botched the placement, nearly causing a new... And only EBI's quick action corrected the disastrous Iran error that was, of course, never officially recorded. The nurses could be just as spiteful. Brenda, an older nurse, resentful of Evie's efficiency, made daily jabs. Still eating that sad little lunch? Evie? She'd sneer, eyeing Evie's simple meal prep. Guess you can't afford much on a small-town salary. Her compassion was routinely ridiculed. Evie was the one who consistently remembered to turn the lights down for the terrified elderly patient or hold the hand of the dying adolescent. Moments of connection the busy staff deemed a wasteful luxury. Her generosity buying snacks for the night shift, taking the worst call rotations, was unseen, merely treated as a given. She endured it all, internalizing the cruelty. The cumulative weight of isolation, exhaustion, and unrecognized burdens was immense. She carried secrets of life and death, of war and survival, that no one in this safe, civilized hospital could ever comprehend, which only deepened the chasm between her outward life and her inner reality. It was an enforced solitude, one she had chosen, but one that was now crushing her spirit. The locker room at MGTC was cramped, smelling perpetually of disinfectant and stale coffee. Evie's locker, number 117, was always neatly organized, her small space a reflection of her clinical discipline. Grace Chun, a veteran nurse who had served 2 tours as a medic during the Gulf War, was retrieving her breakroom mug one afternoon when Evie hastily opened her locker. A small, dark object slipped from a folded lab coat pocket and clattered softly on the metal floor. Evie immediately moved to cover it, but she was a second too late. Grace's eyes, trained to absorb crucial details in an instant, locked onto the item. It was a cloth patch, worn soft at the edges, slightly frayed from years of heavy use and repeated washings. The insignia was striking and stark. A stylized, 3-headed black dog Cerberus, with a crimson lightning bolt streaking across its center. Beneath the image, tiny but clear, were the letters TFC, C, ROP. Task Force, Cerberus, Combat Rescue Officer, Paramedic. Grace Chun froze, her jaw slackened slightly, her face draining of color. She didn't just recognize the patch, she recognized the legend. Task Force Cerberus was a unit whispered about in the highest echelons of military medicina. Mythical, zero-failure combat rescue detachment. CROP was the designation for the lead field medic, a role that required an impossible level of proficiency. A doctor's mind coupled with a sniper's nerve. The patch itself was almost a ghost. TFC was reportedly disbanded after the catastrophic Blackwater Crest incident, its members presumed lost or dead. Grace looked from the patch to Evie. Evie finally picked it up, her fingers smoothing the worn fabric. A slow, knowing smile, not timid, but infinitely sad, touched her lips. Accident, Evie whispered, tucking it away. Grace could only stammer, that unit. That patch, they said the CROP. They said she died. Evie simply shook her head. The person that patch belonged to, Grace. She did die. I'm just what's left over. She offered no history. No confession, only the cryptic suggestion that the elite life, the legendary combat medic, was a phantom she had buried years ago to become the invisible nurse. The sheer horror and dawning respect in Grace's eyes were the last things Evie saw before she walked out for her final, fatal shift. The moment Evie Reed's shadow disappeared into the downpour, a different kind of storm broke loose inside Metropolitan General. The first alert, a level 4 mass casualty incident to MCI, came in via the secure line just as Dr. Vance was settling back into his office, basking in the glow of his petty victory. The cause: a disastrous 40-car pileup on the I-95 overpass, precipitated by the blinding rain and slick roads. The Adores became a chaotic sluice gate, flooding the unit with waves of critical patients. The air immediately thickened with the metallic smell of blood, the sharp tang of vomit, and the frantic pheromones of panic. The siren was still audible inside the ambulance bay. Chaos was instant and absolute. The 4 lines, which Evie had meticulously organized, became tangled spaghetti, snagging on stretchers. The blood bank reserves, which she had quietly monitored and rotated for weeks, dwindled faster than anyone could reorder them, forcing the team to triage blood based on prayer. In Trauma Bay 2, a patient with a severe head injury and suspected tension pneumothorax crashed. Dr. Vance, the man who had just fired the most competent airway specialist in the building, grabbed the intubation kit. His hands, still unsteady from the previous confrontation, shook violently. He tried the initial He tried again, fail. The pulse ox dropped like a stone. "Where is the specialized crick tray?" a resident shrieked, looking for the kit Evie had personally inventoried and kept ready. "It wasn't where it was supposed to be. It's empty." "Who used the last kit?" Dr. Vance, watching the life seep out of his patient, his leadership dissolving in a pool of anxiety, unraveled completely. He froze, simply staring at the monitor, his mouth moving soundlessly. The unit was drowning, and the captain was The catastrophe had found the weak point in their armor, and the weak point was the leadership that had just cast out their backbone. As the MCL raged, turning the ER into a horrifying tableau of confusion and despair, the staff began to experience a series of cascading, critical failures, all traceable to the absence of the ordinary nurse. Brenda tried to set up a massive transfusion protocol MTP, a highly complex, time-sensitive procedure. She fumbled the documentation, unsure of the ratio and the correct blood warmers to activate. Evie had always been the one to silently initiate the protocol, correcting the ratios on the fly based on the patient's individual coagulopathy. Today, the process stalled, costing precious minutes of life. Dr. Singh, trying desperately to manage 3 trauma patients simultaneously, called for the specialized arterial line kit. Evie always kept that kit pre-organized and stocked at the top of the supply cart. Now, the cart was a disheveled mess. "The arterial line tray isn't here." "Where the hell is the arterial line tray?" he yelled, realizing Evie was the one who ran the meticulous inventory they all took for granted. Every small stabilizing anchor in the unit was gone. The crash cart in Trauma Bay 1 hadn't been checked for a full 2 weeks. Evie had performed the daily checks. A critical lab slip was mixed up with a routine test. Evie had always sorted the immediate priority tests by color-coded tabs. The staff suddenly grasped a horrifying truth. The quiet, underestimated woman they had ridiculed wasn't just a nurse, she was the invisible, stabilizing force. The quiet sentinel who absorbed the stress and fixed the mistakes before they became crises. Her silence hadn't been timid. It had been disciplined. Her organization hadn't been obsessive. It had been preemptive. Her absence wasn't a hole. It was a catastrophic vacuum, an undeniable collapse that proved her mastery and their dependence. 1,000 miles offshore, far from the chaos of Metropolitan General, a crisis of a different, more lethal kind was unfolding high above the Atlantic swells. A Navy's special response team, aboard an MH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, was mid-mission a high-stakes retrieval operation when a sudden, violent pressure failure ripped through the cabin at altitude. The rapid depressurization caused massive internal injuries to 2 of the operators, a severe bilateral tension pneumothorax, coupled with blunt force trauma from unsecured equipment. The Black Hawk was in an immediate, controlled descent, but the operators were dying fast. Their lone medic, a young, skilled petty officer named Aiden, was pinned against the fuselage by a broken cargo harness. His legs shattered. He was conscious, but he couldn't move, forced to watch his teammates gasp for their final breaths. The situation was impossible. They needed an immediate, highly specialized procedural deep field, whole-tissue emergency thoracotomy technique that bypassed standard hospital protocols and was designed for zero-resource environments. It was a procedure so brutal, so precise, and so risky that only a handful of specialists in the world were truly proficient. And Aiden, pinned and powerless, knew exactly who that specialist was. The Black Hawk's co-pilot, a seasoned lieutenant commander, scrambled to the secure satellite radio. He bypassed every chain of command, every protocol, dialing a number known only to a select few in the special operations community. "Sir, we have to..." Hemothorax. Deteriorating fast. Eden is trapped. We need a CROP. Specifically, the CROP. The commander rasped into the mic. The voice on the other end, Commander Level, and Granite Heart, replied immediately. The Grey Ghost. She's a ghost for a reason. Where is she? We think she's in civilian clothes, somewhere in the metro area. Find her now. She is the only one who can field suture. A collapsed lung with a modified catheter. And keep them breathing till the carrier. There was only one impossible option. They had to find Evie Reed, the one combat medic trained for this exact, terrifying scenario. Evie stood hunched against the brick wall of a deserted laundromat, half a mile from the hospital. The rain felt cold and personal, stinging her face. Her cheap canvas bag was sodden, and the paper in the termination folder was beginning to dissolve. She was simply exhausted, not just from the shift, but from the years of pretending to be small. She had buried her life, and now, it seemed, her new, smaller life was rejecting her too. Her phone, a basic, non-smart device she kept for professional anonymity, buzzed. The number was blocked, displaying only unknown. She almost ignored it, assuming it was a call about her suddenly open night shift. She swiped to answer. Hello? Her voice was small, dampened by the rain. The voice on the other end cut through the wind and the white noise of the storm. It was deep, level, and held an undeniable authority that was used to commanding thousands of men and multi-billion-dollar assets. It was Colonel Hayes, Evie Reed. This is Colonel Hayes, Task Force Cerberus. Your services are required immediately, ma'am. Evie's heart, which had been a slow, dull ache, gave a sharp, painful thump. She hadn't heard that voice, or that title, in over 5 years. Colonel, I don't know what you mean. I'm a civilian, nurse. I was just fired. Hayes's voice was utterly devoid of emotion, a cold tool of command. Your current employment status is irrelevant. Your records were never purged. Pressure failure. 2 operators. Severe hemothorax. 1 pinned medic. We need the Grey Ghost. Your oath, Evelyn, not your job title. The word oath was a live wire. It bypassed her defenses, her exhaustion, her humiliation. It spoke not to her career, but to her identity. In that moment, the timid nurse dissolved, and the hardened, definitive medic She closed her eyes, feeling the cold rain cleanse the pretense from her skin. Understood, Colonel, she replied, her voice now flat and steady, the softness gone. Send coordinates. I'm en route. The coordinates led Evie back toward the hospital district, though she was instructed to stand on a specific, unmarked corner of the roof-access parking garage. The atmosphere was already tense, punctuated by the faint, muffled sounds of the MCI, still raging inside the hospital. Then, the sound changed. It became a rising, deep-throated roar to the unmistakable slap, slap, slap of rotary wings, moving fast and low. 2 black, unmarked MH-60 slick helicopters descended through the blinding rain like vengeful spirits. The downdraft was immense, a calculated hurricane that instantly shredded her cheap termination folder and flattened her to the concrete. The noise was overwhelming, a visceral, teeth-shaking declaration of immediate priority. As the first helicopter settled its landing lights, blinding the side door was thrown open. 2 figures, heavily armored and moving with the coiled tension of special operators, leaped out into the storm. They were Yush, their gear glistening weightly, in a stunning, non-protocol display of military respect and desperate need. Both armored men dropped to one knee before her. Their helmets were lowered, a gesture of deference rarely shown to anyone, especially a perceived civilian. Ma'am, the lead operator bellowed over the roar. His voice filtered through his comm system. We need you. Please. He extended a hand. In his palm rested a pristine, newly issued patch, the 3-headed Cerberus, the lightning bolt, and the designation TFC CRO, a replacement for the one she detooked. Hawaii. It was a formal reactivation, a desperate plea for her identity back. The sight was so unbelievable that the chaos inside MGTC was forgotten. Several residents and nurses, escaping the ER madness for a smoke break or a moment of air, had spilled out onto the lower decks of the parking garage. They watched phones held aloft, filming the unbelievable spectacle. The quiet, unremarkably nurse Evie Reed fired moments ago, being knelt to by elite military personnel in the middle of a city storm. Her hidden identity of Falcon Response Unit, combat-led medic, revealed to a stunned, humiliated hospital staff. Evie didn't hesitate. She dropped her soaking bag and climbed aboard the slick, fast roping herself into the cabin with practiced grace. The door slammed shut, and the aircraft immediately lifted off, banking sharply into the storm. Inside, the cabin was a tight space, filled with heavy, specialized equipment. The young operators, still clearly shaken, looked at her with a mixture of awe and guilt. "Ma'am," the operator who had knelt before her said, shouting slightly over the engine noise. "My name is Sergeant Mealer. We didn't know. We thought you were gone." Another operator, a young man who looked barely out of training, confessed, "We learned about the gray ghosts in the academy. We were told you were killed in the Blackwater Crest incident, a martyr to the mission." The mention of Blackwater Crest, a catastrophic raid where Evie's entire forward team had been lost, made her jaw clench momentarily. She settled into a seat, strapping herself in with familiar, quick movements. She looked at the shaken young faces, her own composed and resolute, the softness of Nurse Evie Reed completely replaced by the steel of CROP. "Eveline Reed, I survived the blast." "Sergeant," she admitted, her voice calm and even. "I extracted myself, but I lost everything I had there. Too many brothers and sisters." She paused, her eyes dark with 5 years of trauma. The battlefield no longer felt like service. It felt like a grave. "I walked away and tried to heal. I came here looking for quiet." She tapped a new patch on her shoulder. "But the oath, it seems, has a longer memory than I do. Now, brief me on the casualties. What resources do we have?" En route. The moment for history was over. The need for the medic was immediate. The Black Hawk rendezvoused with a target vessel in Navy, destroyer cutting through massive Atlantic swells. The pitch and roll of the ship made the transfer treacherous, and the operating environment inside the destroyer's small medical bay was dark, loud, and unstable. The moment Evie stepped onto the deck, she was all medic. She assessed the dying soldier, a huge special warfare operator named Chief. He was barely breathing, his chest fixed in a rigid, terrifying paralysis. The massive hemothorax and tension pneumothorax were seconds from ending his life. No time for full sterilization. "We're going field up," she commanded, peeling off her soggy civilian clothes to reveal a clean set of borrowed tactical scrubs beneath. The destroyer's physician, a shocked young doctor, protested weakly. "Ma'am, we have to wait for the chest tube kit and the X-ray." Evie didn't even look at him. "He'll be dead by the time that X-ray develops. Give me the sharpest scalpel you have, and get me a large bore catheter, the thickest one, with no proper surgical setup." Evie began. The impossible procedure. A brutal, precise sequence known only to elite combat medics for zero-resource environments. She modified the scalpel, attaching it to a specialized grip to give her the depth control of a thoracic surgeon. "I need light, and I need this deck stable," she ordered. Working in the violently pitching bay, she made a precise, deliberate incision beneath the chief's pectoralis muscle. She didn't cut, she dissected, using her fingertip to enter the pleural space, navigating past the ribcage to the compressed lung. It was a blind, tactile operation, relying on years of perfect anatomical memory. The young doctor gasped as she plunged the catheter into the chest cavity, guiding it with her other hand, then connecting it to a crude, improvised seal made from saline tubing. Fifshekt, a horrible, pressurized hiss erupted from the incision, followed by a sudden gush of blood and air. The lethal pressure that was squeezing the heart and lungs was instantly relieved. Evie held the tube steady, her face inches from the chief's. It was a brutal procedure, but it had reversed a lethal pressure collapse and restored the life-giving mechanics of breathing in seconds. The transformation was immediate and absolute. The chief, whose skin had been turning a terrifying shade of blue-gray, suddenly gave a deep, ragged, gasping cough. The rigidity left his chest, and his eyes fluttered open, blinking against the harsh emergency lights. He wasn't safe yet, but he was breathing, his body no longer fighting an impossible internal war. The silence in the small medical bay was profound, broken only by the engine noise and the chief's new, struggling breaths. Even the hardened operators, who had seen unimaginable horror, were shocked into a stillness that bordered on reverence. Sergeant Miller and the co-pilot watched, their expressions shifting from tension to exhausted, tearful relief. The young physician, the one who had protested her methods, leaned against the wall, his own medical knowledge suddenly feeling thin and theoretical. How? How did you know exactly where to go? No imaging, no full prep. Evie was already moving to the second casualty, her eyes focused. She glanced at the doctor. Anatomy doesn't change, doctor. Only the amount of time you have to save it. When you're in a helicopter taking small arms fire, you learn to trust your hand more than a machine. The team was witnessing their own legend brought to life. The mythic medic, the gray ghost of Blackwater Crest, whom they had mourned and memorialized, turned out to be real. She was alive, skilled beyond any physician they had ever encountered. And once again, she was saving the men who fought beside her, fulfilling an oath that civilian life could never truly annul. In the space of 2 minutes, she had reclaimed her destiny. The return trip was fast and silent, the Black Hawk now carrying a mission accomplished. The storm had begun to clear, revealing a sliver of weak dawn light. The spectacle that unfolded at Ridgeview Memorial was a defining moment for the hospital's history. 2 unmarked Special Operations MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters landed with thunderous authority directly on the hospital's designated roof helipad, a space usually reserved for sleek, single-engine air ambulances. The sheer, overwhelming power of the landing sent a wave of shock through the already beleaguered hospital. The chief physician, Dr. Vance, having finally stabilized the ER chaos hours later through sheer exhaustion, was making a self-congratulatory round when he heard the roar. He rushed to the observation deck just as the Black Hawk doors opened. Colonel Ayes, having flown in on the Commandant control helicopter, stepped out first. He was a figure of absolute, cold fury, a man who radiated lethal intent. He strode directly toward the group of medical staff staring up from the observation deck, Dr. Vance among them. "Which one of you is the chief physician of this facility?" Hayes's voice, amplified by his cum system, cut through the rotor wash. Dr. Vance, puffing his chest out, stepped forward. "I am Dr. Vance, attending physician." Hayes looked at him with profound disdain. "You," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level, "fired a Task Force Cerberus combat rescue officer for insubordination, officer who was, at that moment, the most valuable medical asset in the Atlantic seaboard. Your petty professional jealousy nearly cost us 2 of our best men." The entire O staff was paralyzed in humiliation, witnessing the utter destruction of their hierarchy. Then, Evie stepped off the Black Hawk. She was still in the borrowed tactical scrubs, soaked from the first rain. Calm and quietly magnificent. She simply nodded once to the colonel, bypassed Dr. Vance, and walked toward the staff entrance. She had saved lives. Her business here was finished. The official fallout was immediate and devastating. Within hours, the hospital CEO, Mr. Davenport, a man who had never set foot in the was delivering a groveling, formal apology to Evie in the hospital administrator's office. Dr. Vance had been placed on immediate, indefinite administrative leave. Nurse Reed, Evelyn. Mr. Davenport stammered, his face white. We offer our deepest, most profound apologies. We did not understand the caliber of the clinician we had. Effective immediately, we are reinstating you as the Director of Clinical Operations, with a commensurate salary and a retroactive bonus for the month. Evie, clean and changed into simple but neat street clothes, declined the offer with quiet dignity. "Mr. Davenport, Thank you. But no. 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 But the title, the compensation. I serve to save lives, so Evie replied, her voice steady, not to chase titles or sit in an office. This environment, she gestured to the surrounding hospital, is compromised by its hierarchy and its ego. I'm looking for a different place to serve. The rejection was a clear denouncement of their flawed system. Outside, the doctors and nurses who had relentlessly mocked her now stood in small, humbled groups. Dr. Singh, his arrogance evaporated, approached her tentatively. Evie. Ms. Reed. I need to know how you handled the improvised thoracic access. Would you ever consider giving us a session, teaching us? Brenda, the spiteful nurse, offered her a small, sincere pack of expensive instant coffee. I'm sorry, Evie. I truly am. We were blind. Evie smiled, a real, warm smile that reached her eyes. She promised to send them reading materials on field trauma protocols, but firmly declined Her service was owed elsewhere now, not to an institution that had broken her, but to the principle of healing she still fiercely believed in. 2 days later, the rain was gone, replaced by a cool, clear morning. Evie sat at a small outdoor table at a quiet cafe miles from the hospital, sipping a black coffee. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up silently. 2 men, no longer in tactical gear, but in crisp civilian suits, approached her table. They were Task Force Cerberus, Sergeant Miller and a senior commander, her former operational partner, thought to have been killed alongside the rest of the team at Blackwater Crest. The commander placed a small, polished wooden box on the table. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a new patch. It was the Cerberus insignia, but this one was framed with a wreath of olive branches, and the designation below read, TFC Chief Commander, Medical Training Honorary. It's not for combat, Evelyn, the commander said, his voice thick with emotion. It's for the future. You're the best medic this country has ever produced. We need you to teach the next generation of CROP. We need the gray ghosts to train the ghosts. Evie picked up the patch. The weight of the silver thread felt substantial, a true honor that meant more than any hospital title. Quiet emotion washed over her, the weight of her old life now feeling like a mantle of purpose rather than a burden of trauma. I won't return to the field, Commander, she stated clearly. I can't. But I will teach them. I will make sure they are better prepared than we were. She accepted the patch, choosing not to return to the violence of the battlefield but promising to remain a fierce protector for her brothers and sisters in arms, by ensuring their medics never fail. It was her new oath, one of healing through education. Evie finished her coffee and left the cafe. Her few belongings were packed, and her rental car was pointed west, toward a new, undisclosed military facility where she would begin training the next cohort of elite field medics. She walked past the Metropolitan General Trauma Center one final time. It looked mundane now, just another brick building in a sprawling city, its internal drama no longer her own. As she reached the corner, the sound began again, not the chaotic roar of a quick extraction, but a controlled, rising wave of sound that captivated the street. 2 MH-60s, stripped of all markings, swooped low over the city skyline. They didn't land. Instead, they performed a coordinated, synchronized aerial salute at tight, perfect flyby, known as a missing man formation. But with a slight, respectful deviation, the helicopters tilted their noses down in a direct, aerial nod of respect to the ground below. The entire street stopped to watch the awesome display. The staff on the lower floors of the hospital looked up, knowing exactly who the tribute was for. Evie stooped, looked up into the clear blue morning sky, and raised her hand, palm forward, in a silent, final acknowledgement to her unit. A soft, almost inaudible whisper escaped her lips, directed at the sky, at her past, and at her future. If I can teach them to save even one more life, if I can prevent even one tragedy like Blackwater Crest, then everything, the cruelty, the silence, the sacrifice will always be enough. She smiled, a genuine, content smile, and walked on, leaving the role of the silent nurse for the legacy of the legendary medic. The story of Evelyn Reed, the Grey Ghosties, a powerful testament to the danger of judging a book by its cover. The essential lesson here is, humility is not the same as incompetence, and often, the quietest people are carrying the greatest weight of competence and character. The people who seek validation through noise and titles like Dr. Vance and the hospital's staff are often the weakest links. Those who work in silence, driven purely by the mission like Evie, are the true foundations of success. Never mistake a person's gentle exterior or lack of ambition for a lack of capability. Always seek to elevate the silent contributor, for they are often the ones holding the whole structure together. We hope the story of Evelyn Reed has stimulated your curiosity and convinced you of the power of silent strength. May you find the confidence to recognize your own unseen strengths and the wisdom to recognize the quiet heroes around you. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the silent power of a true professional, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more untold stories of resilience and redemption.